Hello and welcome. Today we're in the upcoming Tier 10 Royal Navy battleship, the Thunderer, and she is a work in progress, meaning that she is subject to change. I expect her to change slightly because there are quite many people who are unhappy. And right at the start of the match I am a very helpful teammate to my division mate. This Yugumo right here is actually AFK, so I'm gonna help him get to the enemy slightly faster. Because that's what battleships are for, right? But it seems that our team actually has better cooperation than the enemy team, because the enemy Zhao sank herself. That is, she probably launched torpedoes at an ally or shot an ally and the damage reflection killed her instead. That's something I don't recommend doing. It generally destroys your chance of winning the match, because you're basically taking out 1.5 ships. Anyway, moving on to the ship. So, what is the Thunderer? In short, she is basically a worse Conqueror, in my opinion. She has some slight advantages over the Conqueror, but I would say they're kinda minor. But on the other hand, the differences in gameplay, at least from my perspective, are also very minor. That is, I have played the Thunderer, and she has performed rather effectively in my hands. I played her basically the same as I play a Conqueror, and she is just slightly worse at it because she has 457mm guns instead of the 419, I believe, that the Conqueror has. That is, you don't have the option on the ship, you are basically just only the 457s. And the downside with this is that you only have 8 guns compared to the 12 that the Conqueror has. And the end result is that the DPM just isn't quite the same. Now, on the bright side, the Thunderer has the legendary upgrade built into her, so you can take the concealment upgrade and you get the advantage of the better rudder shift and the turret traverse as well at the same time, which is really nice. Now, another thing that's different is that the Thunder actually, as far as I understand, has a standard AP, so this means that it's gonna be, in my opinion, slightly more effective against battleships, especially at close range, to suddenly sink them than the standard Conqueror would be. Now, one downside though is that she also has I would say a standard heal, but it's not quite standard. It's basically a mix between a standard heal and something like the Ohio's heal. That is, her heal has a 60-second cooldown instead of 80 seconds as is a standard heal, but it lasts 28 seconds, just like a Montana's heal, for example, heals basically the same amount of HP too. So it's not super heal like the Conqueror has, which I think is gonna be a big problem for this ship, because this means that your maximum healed amount per match is actually half of what the Conqueror gets. And as you can imagine, it's gonna be quite a problem for me here, because I am already down to 15,000 HP and it's only 4 minutes into the match. But you saw how fast my turret traverse or rudder shift here was to be able to dodge those torpedoes. The Conqueror can do the same thing with the same build if you have the legendary upgrade. You just don't have quite the same concealment. You'll have it because you don't get the concealment upgrade. But I would say that at this point I definitely would like to have the regular or super heal instead of the standard heal. Now, the Thunder also gets a defensive fire, which is quite nice, but I think it doesn't really matter too much, because the Conqueror actually has fairly decent anti-air anyway. Her main problem is that her anti-air is in the mid-range and it just tends to evaporate to all the HE spam. That is, well, eventually shot at you. Okay, so like I said, I play her mostly like the Conqueror. I go in at first, I back off, I tank a bunch, then heal up, and then I just shell from range with HE, because that deals quite a lot of damage. It's not as effective as it would be on a 419 Conqueror, but it's still pretty good in my opinion. I mean, I've already done 93k damage, although, to be honest, quite a bit of it was with AP, but those were appropriate AP targets. But I mean, here you can see 7600 damage with HE from range and the fire. So I really think that the ship is basically plays the same as the Conqueror. She's, as far as I can understand, just Conqueror. except just slightly worse. And to be honest, the differences aren't like massive. I wouldn't take this ship into ranked over the Conqueror, for example, but for random battles, I don't think I would care too much. I do think that if Wargaming thinks Conqueror is fine as she is, also this has the same armor scheme, etc. as the Conqueror, so, you know, in that sense, there's no difference. I actually showed the ship in port later, it's around the 15-ish minute mark in the video. Basically, if Wargaming thinks Conqueror is fine as she is, then Thunderer probably should get some kind of a buff. I'm not sure what it should be. Maybe she should have super heal. If she had super heal, I can't really think of a difference between the ship and the Conqueror really, other than the DPM. I think I would still prefer the Conqueror, so yeah. The ships might be a bit too similar. As far as I could understand, the idea Wargaming had was that as long as you have two options for guns on a ship, one is going to be superior. So on the Conqueror you have 457s or 419s. So the idea is that if they release the Thunderer as with 457s, they can balance it separately from the Conquerors. So it's not necessarily the case that one is always superior than the other one. And I think that's a good idea, it's just that the Thunderer just kind of misses the mark a little bit. She feels a bit too inferior, I suppose. Many other people compare her to the Iowa, and I definitely agree with them that the Ohio. And I definitely agree with them that the Ohio is superior to the ship. Because the Ohio has a faster reload than the Thunderer does, and she also has a better heal, which is a bit puzzling, because the Ohio also has a better armor scheme, I think, or at least she has more HP, and she also has better secondaries, and quite a few other things. So I think comparing the Thunderer to the Ohio is a bad idea. But Thunderer to the Conqueror, yeah. Like I've said many times now, just slightly worse than the Conqueror, and plays pretty much the same. So I would say this would be a ship that people would want for something like credits farming or whatever. I think if they buffed Thunderer slightly, and left Conqueror as is, I would say this ship would actually be a perfect reward for something like Research Bureau or whatever it is, because it doesn't really give you some massive advantage, it's just different. Slightly. Maybe. If they change the ship. Anyway, as you can see, so far the game's been going pretty decently. Even though I went down to a really low HP and I only have a standard heal, I am already up to 44k and I still have one heal left, and I've done 153k damage. So, like I've said, you play it like the Conqueror. You sit at range, you spam your HE, you sometimes go close, you sometimes take AP shots on cruisers, sometimes on battleships too, unlike the Conqueror I suppose, and it just adds up quite a lot of damage, because it's very effective against battleships. Right now I think we should hold some kind of... We hold the advantage in the middle of the map. And if you look at the minimap, I would have to say that our Bismarck, even though it looks like she's avoiding fights, is actually playing well, because she's a tier 8 battleship. And she is not really a good match against the Des Moines, because Des Moines has 27mm of armor, so she can bounce the AP, and she's basically avoiding the fight and just wasting time, or I suppose delaying the Des Moines and keeping her and maybe the Musashi somewhere around the 8 caps instead of just going down quickly, which I think is good because this gives us more time to deal with all the ships on this side of the map. And I think we're gonna deal with them soon enough. This Tirpitz should go down soon. Like, right now? And now they don't have any battleships over here. And we have a Worcester, Kronstadt, Yugamo, Yoshino, and Thunderer, and they have an Alaska, Shimakaz, and the Benham. I like our chances. So I'm just gonna start sailing towards the A side and hopefully deal with the Des Moines and the Musashi. Because, you know, I don't need to chase down one cruiser. I think Jonas and his Yoshino is already good enough, plus the Kronstadt, plus the Worcester. I think me going against the battleship makes more sense, especially since I am fairly good against battleships. So, my opinion of the Thunderer, other than the fact that it's basically Conqueror, like I've said 20 times already, is that she's okay. She doesn't feel too weak, really, to be honest. Maybe, in fact, if I really think about it, maybe the Thunderer, in terms of balance, makes actually more sense than the Conqueror does. But if the Thunderer stays like this, the Conqueror would need to be nerfed. And honestly, comparing this ship to something like the Ohio or Kremlin, I think the Thunderer is inferior. And so it's not quite something it's not something that makes too much sense, I think, compared to those two, compared to Ohio and Kremlin. But against most of the other tier 10 battleships, Thunderer is okay. But then again, let's be completely honest. Balance in this game is never, like, wildly out of proportions. Even the biggest balance problems we usually talk about are like, well, if you take two ships, it's easy to deal with that one ship, or even 1.5 ships can deal with it. So it's generally not like a huge deal. I guess I'm gonna be fighting this Musashi because that the Moines seems to be hiding. This is why I actually have AP loaded, so I can take a shot on the Des Moines instead of the Musashi. But since the Des Moines is not showing up, I'm gonna use AP on the Musashi. I'm still keeping AP loaded because Des Moines might pop up suddenly, and I think deleting her would go a long way to winning the game. Although I guess we've kinda already won. It's 6 versus 3. I don't think their chances are very good at this point. Now, the Thunderer, just like the Conqueror, isn't exactly great in close range against battleships because the armor just isn't there. She very easily takes quite a bit of damage from, well, even AP from like Des Moines and whatnot. I mean, I just took like 8,000 damage from that Des Moines with AP from this kind of range. That's not exactly great. I have HE loaded here, but I'm gonna swap back to AP because it seems this Musashi might actually want to show me some side. And another thing is that Musashi definitely can overmatch my bow, so yeah, you just saw, I just took a massive hit here. This is something I do need to be careful of, but luckily Musashi has a nice cheek. So, Musashi, you've been thunderstruck. That is the cheeky armor of the Musashi and Yamato, where you can get some very nice salvos on them. Okay, so next up is the Des Moines, and then it's just a wrap up against the destroyer. Oh, and the Bismarck is actually capping A now, which is great, right? I have used up all of my heals already though, so that's a shame, but meh, it's okay. Oh wow, 15k damage. That's... wait, was it really 15k? Damn, that's a pretty nice shot. Torpedoes, huh? Well, we know where... oh, I think I just died. Well, I might as well bring all of my turrets then, because, yeah, there's no way to survive this. Just one torpedo will finish me. And there it goes. Oh well, I couldn't finish the Des Moines, but I think this was still a great game. And we're definitely gonna win. 5 versus 2, plus we have all 3 caps? No way. And I just skipped towards the end. Shimakas doesn't actually go down. The Des Moines did, but the Shima didn't. Which is well played by him. But I mean, 261k damage, 2 ships sunk, so that's not the greatest, but 261k damage. I mean, this just shows that you can definitely have great games in the Thunder, and this was some of the earliest games I did in tests. 20, 77 base XP, so not the greatest, because a lot of the damage was on battleships, but yeah, HE spam on this ship pays off, just like it does on the Conqueror. Maybe just slightly worse. And 60k on the Musashi. Here you can see the damage. 98k with AP, 80k with HE, but you have to add the 80k fire damage too to the HE, so HE definitely was more effective per shell, but AP does more alpha, so sometimes it is more useful. Yeah. I'd say the Thunder is just fine. Oh, and 3.1 million potential damage. That's a bit more tanking than what I'm used to, especially when I don't have super heal or some amazing armor scheme. So, let's take a look at the Thundera in port, but truth be told, she is basically the Conqueror with some differences which we'll go over soon. But first, let's take a look at the captain skills that I use, so you have some context. So I wanted Priority Target, Expert Marksman, obviously, Superintendent, Concealment Expert, Adrenaline Rush, and the last 7 points, Fire Prevention and Basics of Survivability. On the Conqueror, I usually decide between Survivability Expert or Basics of Survivability, but on the Thunderer, definitely don't take Basics of Survivability. Or sorry, Survivability Expert. Basics of Survivability is just much better. Then Survivability Expert does not make sense with a standard heal that the Thunderer has. So let's go over the consumables. It's a standard British damage control party, lasts for 15 seconds, cooldown 80 seconds. An actually slightly different type. It's a standard heal, that is, it lasts for 28 seconds and heals about as much as basically all the other battleships. But it has a 20-second better cooldown, so 60 seconds instead of the 80 seconds normally. But this isn't nearly as good as, say, the Ohio's, which heals for more HP per tick and has a 40-second cooldown. And it's nowhere near the Conqueror's heal. You see? 596 per tick, right? For 28 seconds, let's take a look at the Conqueror's heal. This is 2073 per tick, lasts for 20 seconds. Well, this is with Survivability Expert, but that's a very minor difference here. So, as you can see, there's basically all the heals together on the Thunder are like half as much as what the Conqueror gets. But the Thunder does get defensive fire, which is nice, I suppose, but I think it's not quite as useful as people might think, because Conqueror and Thunderer have difficulty keeping their anti-air guns alive anyway. And speaking of that, in terms of upgrades, maybe actually auxiliary armaments make sense, because your AA batteries will survive for longer. I haven't really tried it, I probably should, but planes aren't really that big of a threat right now, so I don't think it will make much of an impact. In the second slot, damage control system modification. In the third slot, I actually went with aiming systems modification, because the DPM on this ship isn't quite as great as Conqueror, so I wanted to squeeze every inch out of it, but otherwise AA guns are also a very good option, because, you know, having more flak is better. In the fourth slot, I actually go with steering gears. On many other battleships, I go with damage control, but I think steering gears here makes more sense, because with this stuff, your rudder shift is 8.3 seconds. This is cruiser levels of rudder shift on a tier 10 battleship. This is amazing. And in the fifth slot is Concealment System Modification 1. This is the one big advantage that the Thunderer has over the Conqueror. You see, she can take the Concealment upgrade, whereas on the Conqueror you go with the Legendary upgrade in this slot, right? And you have the same rudder shift with it. This Legendary gives 13% main battery traverse speed, 40% rudder shift timing, or minus 40%, and steering gears fixing. But the Thunderer has this stuff built in, so you get this advantage where you have better concealment as a result while maintaining the same rudder shift and basically the same turret traverse. And in the last slot, obviously, I go for better main battery reload. So, let's take a look at the armor first, I guess, but it's exactly the same as far as I can understand as the Conqueror. We can just compare. You can see it's the same basically, like 406, 406, 279, 32, 32, 406, 406, and 279. It's the same thing as far as I can understand. The Citadel sits slightly above the waterline here, and here the Citadel sits slightly above the waterline as well. So, yeah, you're not really... You really aren't gaining anything in terms of armor as far as I can understand. In terms of the stats, they're basically the same as the Conqueror. 82,900 HP, 28% torpedo, a belt, which is the same as the Conqueror. Keep in mind this is with Survivability Expert, so it'll have more HP. The guns are... I don't actually know, maybe the guns are slightly better than the Conquerors. But with the upgrades, it's 35.6 second turret traverse. Conquerors is basically the same or very similar. HE is very effective, 8200 damage, 65% fire chance. That's pretty good. Now, her AP is standard AP though, unlike the Conquerors, which means that it's, in my opinion, more effective against battleships than Conqueror's AP. But, you know, that's That's not as great of an advantage as you would like to think, because most of the time you play at long range anyway, so it's not like it makes a big difference. The anti-air is pretty good, but it goes down really quickly in my opinion. That's, I think, the biggest issue with it, especially the mid-range one. If it stayed up for longer, then it would be great. Plus you have defensive fire, which obviously makes this anti-air much better than the Conqueror's. 31 knots, 820 meter turning circle, although it's probably something different. You can check out Little White Mouse's charts. She tested the turning circles and they don't really match up to what the stats say, but you can find it out there. 8.3 second rudder shift, and concealment is 12.7 kilometers. Actually, it's 12.3, I believe. I have the wrong camo. That doesn't give me concealment boosts, that's why. Let's see. Yeah, see, 12.3 kilometer concealment with a proper camo. So, the Thunderer is basically, I think, a worse Conqueror. She just isn't as good as the Conqueror is, but she's okay. Like, she's playable in my opinion. But I think that's just because the Conqueror herself is just good enough already, so the Thunderer just doesn't really break the ship too much. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons on Patreon. Thank you very much for your continued support, Martin Wolf, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.